Hey everyone, it's actually Jeb Bush, and today I have the very fortunate opportunity to talk to Nate Lawson, who works for UFC Strike. And UFC Strike has been doing just a lot of really exciting things in the space. And so I thought it'd be great to have him on and talk about UFC Strike, talk about what they've accomplished so far, because we've seen a lot of growth, and talk about what they're looking for in the future, because I think some of us who use the platform a lot still think there's some improvements to be made. There's still some questions lingering. So thanks for jumping on, Nate. Really appreciate it.
It's like about time, right? We've been talking about this for so long.
Yeah.
It's good that we could finally get it together.
Yeah.
Not blaming you, equally my fault. It's been a busy
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah. Yeah. We were DMing back and forth about the UFC before you even started working at Strike.
Yeah,
So,
before
yeah.
I like when I was collecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you went hard at the very beginning. Like you were buying tons of UFC Strike moments.
In different ways, yeah. I bought like 92 Jamal Hills. Um,
Nice.
I ended up, I think, with like 400 moments or something by the time I joined.
Jeez.
Never sold one, so like I just got them all in there.
Yeah.
Um,
And now you
and
can't
I
sell them.
and now
So,
I can't, right? Yeah, completely illiquid. Like
yeah.
the exact opposite of liquid. But I also bought when I joined, or like right before I joined, I was able to buy a champion moment,
Oh, hell
not
yeah.
knowing what they were gonna do with it. But I was like, all right, cool. I'm like in the champion club, even though I'm
Yeah.
you know
I
can't
I
collect.
I will say I think that's one of the coolest things that UFC Strike has done. I think with other like Top Shot and All Day, there's been a little difficulty about like, separating the tiers, like legendary truly being like its own distinct thing. And I feel like UFC Strike has absolutely knocked it out of the park with the Champions Club, where it's like, look, like if you own a legendary moment or a champion moment, you immediately get access to this club. This is something that you can't, if you have a whole set of rares, you don't get access to it. This is the only way to get through that gate. And I think that is so cool. I think it's one of the coolest things that a Dapper like product has done, or just any product in the space where they've done like, no, here's like a gated event where look, you can go multiple times too. It's attached to a massive company, and if you have a champion moment, you're probably a massive UFC fan anyway. So can you tell me a little bit about how that like came about and how you guys were able to pull that off? Because right out the that's something I would have expected 3 years from now, not
Yeah,
first year.
yeah, it was exciting. And so like I know I jumped right into it, but yeah, I joined like 3 months, 4 months ago maybe now. And this is a good segue because actually like right when I joined, discussions were happening about Champion Club.
Hmm.
And so like just the week prior I had bought Stipe Miocic's champion moment. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's pretty surreal. I flew out to Vancouver, the Dapper offices. We're sitting there with the GM of Strike, our partnerships, our product teams, and we're just like talking about Champion Club. I'm like, wow, this is something I would have really liked as a collector, but to your point, not expecting it so soon.
Yeah.
Um, but really, like this was something that by the time I had joined Strike, which was again 3 or 4 months ago, they already had like a pretty good understanding of what they wanted it to be. And I think you hit it on the head that it was meant to be very like well defined.
Okay.
And I think like this space, there's a lot of ambiguity. And one of the things we needed to make happen was make sure that we didn't have just like rarities for the sake of rarities, but that or we also didn't want to like create something that was like just like a badge. We
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to create something that had like tangible benefits for our core user who's going to be that diehard UFC fan. Maybe a Shogun fan. You collect his champion moment. Francis Ngannou fan collect his champion moment. So that's really where it came from. It was like, what do they want? And it all quickly came together from there. And then worked on the numbers a little bit. Of course, like the Series 1 update, dropping champion moments from like the 10,000 mint down to 3,000. So
Mm-hmm.
we really just like are able to maintain, like to manage like, the amount of members that are in it so that we're able to like deliver against what we said we would.
Hmm.
It feels very controlled, and we wanted it to be controlled and something that, didn't get out of hand or like run off the rails because it
Yeah.
wasn't defined enough.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. It seems very like forward thinking that you guys are like, look, like these are the numbers we have. Like it seemed very planned out and detail oriented, which once again, like I said, that's something I would have expected years from now, not right out the gate. And I think it's really cool that the UFC seemed to be pretty on board with it, that you guys are able to work that out where they're like, yeah, like add this champions lounge to like within the arena at a UFC fight. So how is it working with the UFC? Because I think the big difference is like if you have Top Shot, they have to work with individual teams, individual broadcasting, plus the NBA as a whole, while UFC is like kind of all under one umbrella. So how does that work? How like when you guys come up with something, how do you approach the UFC and what kind of like permissions and channels do you have to go through to really see if something has wings?
Yeah, great question. It's a very tight partnership, and I feel I'm very grateful. I am a UFC fan, so like I have always appreciated their product. I've always
Yeah.
appreciated their fighters and all of that. They want to push the envelope, like so they're actually very receptive, very open to new ideas. I would say that like I don't feel dissuaded or discouraged from sharing things. None of us do.
Hmm.
The process really goes down to like we work very hard on like refining things to a point that we believe is something that we would want to take a shot on, and we have plenty of things that we like want to take shots on, and then when we feel good about those, like it's in a place where we can deliver against them, that's when we would like typically go to UFC for more like approvals and everything. But we work very closely to make sure that they feel that we're representing their brand really well. We are very cognizant of the importance of representing their brand well.
Hmm.
So it's honestly been like a very seamless sort of relationship. We all kind of want the same exact thing, but also we're also both sides are very eager to get things done. Like things can't happen fast enough. Is like not from them,
Yeah.
just in general, like UFC Strike, like where my mind's at right now is like things kind of like we're moving quickly, but like we're pushing, and like there's more that needs to be done, and like UFC is very on board with us doing that. So we
That's
don't really
really
run
cool.
into bottlenecks. Like, of course, you have to like you can't get everything you ask for all at
Yeah.
once,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they're very amendable. They're very lovely to work with. Yeah, like it's not even like work really. It's very partnership. Like very few issues.
Yeah, you guys are
Very
clear
great.
like, you guys have the same vision instead of competing for, like, what you want this to, like, actually be and how it's gonna work in tangent with the UFC.
Exactly. And if they have feedback on things, like we're totally open to it. And then there are instances where, like we go back and forth on things and then arrive at the exact, sort of like mid ground. Like
Hmm.
it's been a very fruitful relationship. And I think at least like a lot of our like core collectors have seen that sort of culminate in like what we're able to do, how we're able to move.
Yeah.
Like launching Champion Club, I'm sure we'll get into other things, but like hype NFT, getting things out the door quickly is like critical, and it's nice to have a partner that is very aligned to that.
Yeah, no, that's so cool and so encouraging to hear. Because I mean, as a hardcore UFC strike collector myself, like like I said, I've been blown away multiple times where I'm just like, wow, like this is like a really cool, innovative idea. Even like the meetups you guys are doing, and like you said, you're using the UFC brand, so they could be very, if they wanted to, they could be very, very, very careful with how you use it. And instead, they're like, look, we like it. It sounds like, and based on what I'm seeing too and what you're saying, it sounds like they're like, yeah, we trust you guys, and like let's just make sure we keep the communication going, and like we want to run with you as fast as you guys can go, because the UFC is growing as a sport at like such a rapid pace too.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. Definitely not a knock on like any of the other products because NBA and NFL are just like different animals, right? Like
Yeah. Well, and they're way bigger too. Like they've already had their
exactly.
growth, you know.
Like every
There's
franchise is worth like $1 billion, $2 billion
exactly.
in the NFL, and it's like UFC's worth like I don't know what it is these days, but it feels like it's still like on a pretty aggressive growth trajectory and like has a global appeal that like I
Yeah.
rarely see for sports, at least in America. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think the
So
fact that their scheduling can be like very flexible, like even with the NFL, how they're trying to do like games in London, it's like they're like, oh, but it still has to be on Sunday. Like we're trying to figure all this stuff out. The UFC is like, yeah, we're gonna go and do a fight in Paris. We're gonna go do a fight in like London. Like we
yep,
can just go and do this because it's a little easier to set up, and like as long as the fighters are there, like they didn't have a fight the week before that they have to worry about. They're coming. They've been preparing for this fight for months, so they're fine.
exactly. And they're excited to be there versus
Yeah.
like having to be there. Like you said. And that's another like thing where it's a testament to the UFC that they also do cool so that we're then like, wait a minute, you guys are doing something for you have a London event, like okay, how do we lean into that more? And so it becomes this like symbiotic relationship where like we feed off each other in a positive, 1+1 doesn't equal 2 sort of way.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun to be like
That's cool.
surprisingly fun.
Well, if speaking about fun, like what does your day-to-day look like working for UFC Strike? And to kind of extrapolate on that even more, like have you had the opportunity to interact with some UFC fighters, maybe with like Dana himself even? Like I said, I know like you
Yeah.
are a big UFC fan before this started. You and I talked UFC before you were working at Strike. So like what is that like as a UFC fan working your day to day at UFC Strike?
It was pretty surreal early on. Like I was like watching fights all day and like had Fight Pass up and like I was just like, wait a minute. Like it's not like Saturday. But I work pretty closely with like their partnerships team and marketing team. Not like one to one all the time, but we have like weekly syncs. We're
Mhm.
constantly going back and forth on things, on creative direction, things of that nature. I haven't spoken to Dana yet. I haven't had that privilege. Bucket list for sure. Me, Dana, and the Nelk boys at brunch in Vegas after 279, maybe. Um,
Yeah.
no, but the one thing about the UFC, in terms of like, it isn't like they don't give us access. So like
Mhm.
we have had a lot of fighters come to these, champion club meetups at the events.
Yeah. I've
Um,
seen that. That looks so cool.
gotten to meet a couple fighters through that. Like we did an AMA with Josh Emmett in the Discord, and like Malik Jeffrey, the GM of UFC Strike. He and I work very closely together. Like he's like sort of like the mastermind behind a lot of like the like champion club things of that nature.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he and I were like texting with Josh Emmett, and then like texting with Adrian Yanez when his champion or when we did the champion club airdrop. So like it's pretty weird, but like I try to not bother these people too much. Like they're so
Yeah.
down to earth is what's crazy. And it's like maybe it hits your point earlier about like the London NFL games is that like these guys are tired probably.
Yeah.
Like they had a flight, like they had a game the last week and like they're off schedule, it's wonky. But like you had like at UFC 276 in Dallas, 77.
Mhm.
We had Adrian Yanez was there, Uriah Hall was there, Julian
Wow.
Marquez was there, and they all just were like extremely chill, taking photos with everybody, polite.
That's
Like
so cool.
it's weird how like down to earth they all are.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, yeah, they didn't just like this isn't like a quick stop in between like two massive fights. It's like because there's this space between fights, they can like take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit and just like enjoy things as long as they're not like about to jump into camp for their next fight.
Yeah, the crazy thing was is that like Uriah Hall ended up retiring like the week after, and I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
you really were just chilling it. Like you're probably just taking
Yeah.
it all in and like having a real good time. And but no, it is pretty surreal. But at the same time, like they make it very easy. They're very. I'm not just saying that. Like I feel like I'm just sort of raving about the UFC, but like the fighters are so kind and they're so
Yeah.
interested in getting involved and like
But
a lot of it's organic. Like it's very
yeah.
odd how organic all of this comes together and like it makes it I think lean into that viral nature of things a little bit more than anything being forced.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen Josh Emmett on Instagram. I've or on Twitter. He like made a meme or two that
He's a
he like
star.
that he thought was funny. And I think one thing that's
Yeah.
interesting about the UFC and UFC Strike is like, look, like if you go to a basketball game, you can go up to a player without before Top Shot was a thing. You could be like, oh, I have your jersey, I have your card, I have your shoes, I have like all this stuff. There's not really that opportunity in UFC to prove to someone that you're a fan. You can't go like, "Oh, I've got your jersey." Like maybe they released a T-shirt and you happen to have it, but you could be
Like
a
a
huge
fight
fan.
kit.
Yeah, you could be.
Yeah.
You could be a huge fan and not realize that they dropped like this like super niche T-shirt, you know. But like
Yep.
having these moments is like I feel like the first like true collectible around the UFC where these fighters can be like, oh, like you're not just saying it to get a picture with me, like you own like my moment, like you're aware of who I am, you've seen some of my fights. And I think a lot of other sports have had that for a while with other type of collectibles, but UFC, this is the first like real collectible that UFC fighters like, oh, I'm making a genuine connection with a fan, not some random person who's just saying I'm a fan because they think I'm a UFC fighter, you know?
Yep. It's very like difficult to prove to your, like you said, that you're a UFC fan or like to measure it. And it's
Yeah,
already difficult to measure fandom like in anything.
yeah,
But for UFC, it's like they don't really have like, you don't like go to like a like Coachella and wear like,
yeah.
a UFC like no, you're wearing like a Greg Ostertag jersey or something weird. Like
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it doesn't really have that, and so that's one thing about like the digital side of things is like UFC, I think, and I think they believe this, can really lean more into the sort of like there is like a like an empty space there a little bit where like there aren't jerseys really
Yeah.
like there are in the NBA.
Mhm.
So how do you do it? And
Yeah.
this is like a very deterministic way to do it. And that's actually something that like Josh Emmett, Julian Marquez have like cited as like acknowledging like, oh, there's serial numbers and I can see how many of my moments this person collected. I can see the top 10 people, whatever. So like they get it too. Um,
Yeah.
and I
That's
think
really
people
cool.
are starting to think of it like I think the fighters think of it sort of like almost like fan leaderboards,
Yeah.
in a way, which is weird because like I guess other sports do have that in a sense, jersey sales, but like
Yeah. Yeah. Every
what's
year
the
with the
equivalent in UFC?
yeah,
I don't know.
exactly. With the NBA, every year they publish like, oh, top jersey sales, stuff like that. I mean,
Yep.
a good example, I'm a diehard Kobe fan. I have like 20 Kobe jerseys. I have like 40 pairs of Kobe shoes. I've got a couple of his cards, like all this stuff that existed and was established as part of the culture before Top Shot came around. And with the UFC, it's a newer sport and it's like very much like cutting edge in a lot of ways because they've had to innovate to grow the sport. And I think I agree completely where UFC Strike is like that perfect like companion as opposed to competing with something that's already established where like a fighter can be like, oh, finally, like you have 10 of my moments, like that's really cool, like let me sign this for you, like I really appreciate you doing this. Because also like another thing is like an NBA player, especially if they're a big star, they probably have so many streams of revenue, like through like ads and sponsorships and all that stuff. UFC, once again, just like it's a newer sport. Like these fighters don't necessarily like have all that. So like people buying their moments and them getting a cut of that is like a makes a meaningful difference to them.
Yep. I agree with all of that. I think the other leagues, like the thing about the UFC is that, like 15 years ago, it wasn't inevitable,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's
Exactly.
crazy. 15 years ago, MLB was inevitable, NFL inevitable, NBA inevitable. Like, sure, you have strikes here and there, but does anyone ever think these leagues are going away? I don't
Yeah.
think anyone like really thought like it was that existential. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, no,
But
you're
UFC
100%
was
right.
like there were definitely times where like it might not make it anymore. And
Yeah.
so I think they're just like survivors. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of the other things that have worked, like the jerseys and things that like tried and true, don't reinvent the wheel. But like maybe it's not the best way to express your fandom.
Yeah.
And for UFC, we don't think it is. And just because, not to speak for UFC, but for UFC Strike, we certainly don't think it is.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, I can't go to a Laker game when Kobe was playing with all 20 of my jerseys on. That would look ridiculous. But I can go up to Josh Emmett
you could
and be
pull
like,
it off, though.
yeah, maybe. But I can go up to Josh Emmett and be like, look, I have 20 of your moments. And he can be like, oh, wow, like you're a serious fan, clearly. So,
and like at UFC 275, if you were in the champion club and you were there, well, I guess his moment wasn't out quite yet, but he was there.
Yeah.
So someone could have gone at a future champion club meetup. You could literally be speaking to him and showing him the moments, and he has his own Emmett corner in the Discord where you have to own 3 of his moments to get access to it. He was in there like on Friday, I think. He's pretty active in there, and he actually like knows NFTs, which is
that's cool.
Pretty weird.
He seems like all in on this. Like he seems so excited by it. And once again, like you were talking earlier, it does not seem forced. It seems very genuine, where he like legitimately is like using this as an opportunity to connect with his fans.
He is so passionate about like NFTs. He's also like, he just seems more comfortable in like digital space, more so than like a lot of like fighters, I would just say. He just is like a very like easygoing, chill guy, but he is like super passionate about, crypto. He's really been a blast to work with.
Yeah.
But then even like, even if they're not super like, into the tech right now, or like if they're not like, on Ethereum or, buying Top Shot moments or whatever, it's like they still think it's cool that they have like, their rookie moment come out basically, or like Yanez, that knockout that he'd been asking for. Like, I wish we could have got the middle finger in there a little bit more, but like we did okay. But it's an epic moment that like I'll never forget that as a fan. And so, yeah, it's everyone just kind of has a line that it's cool, and the video's cooler than like the static. It's another thing like baseball, 162 games in a season or whatever.
Yeah,
you got a lot to pull from. Here's a static baseball card of Mike Trout. That works. Like that works for that. Like,
I mean, it's shiny though. It's shiny.
And and like I saw one video where they actually like put money in a card where you like pulled the back of it off, and there was like dollars in it, and I was like, and the guy pulls out a $20 bill, and I'm like, 20s? Like that's so weird. But I digress. For fighting, I just think that like the actual video highlight itself is so tantamount to the entire thing, like fandom itself. Like it's almost like basketball. You can express your fandom with the jersey, but it's like for this, it like needs another gear, another level. Like a still image, it just doesn't like connect. It doesn't represent it as well. And so we've seen just like fighters like love the fact that they get to like pull it up, look at it, and it's like they're in a video game or a baseball card. It is that, but we're not going to just do what the NFL does or the NBA does around like the jerseys and whatnot. Like we think of this as like a totally new way to express fandom, and that also probably gives us a little bit more leeway. I think NBA fans and NFL fans have a lot of preconceived notions, a lot of expectations about how things are done in terms of like what they do for when you're the biggest Milwaukee Bucks fan or whatever. Yeah. And UFC, like you said, like people are still exploring ways to, express their fandom beyond getting together for the pay-per-view with their friends on a Saturday night. Like literally that is like an expression of your fandom. Yeah. For UFC, even though it seems so minor and passive. Going to Buffalo Wild Wings to watch the fight. That's it. Yeah. I just think the moment NFTs are a little bit cooler and a little bit more specific. And
I mean,
that's why I collect
nothing is crazier than a knockout. Like just my good friend Seth Anderson, he says moments are best for dunks and knockouts. And I agree. The only thing I can even compare to a knockout is like a crazy dunk where you put someone on a poster. And like those are the most exciting things like ever. Like knockouts are crazy. When you go on YouTube, you don't Google like, 6 submission montage. You look up like top 10 craziest UFC knockouts. And like that's the stuff that everyone wants.
Exactly
and the fact that you get to own that, and you get to like you said, I don't always remember like my favorite fight, but if I have a moment of it and be like, oh yeah, like I remember that this happened. I remember I have a moment. Oh, check it out. Instead of being like, oh gosh, what was that fight? When was it? Which UFC was it? Let me try to Google it. Not that that's going to be the selling point, but I think just even those little details make a big difference, like as a complete package, which is really cool.
That was actually something that that I've discussed internally, just about like how me myself as a fan, it's like, who's your favorite fighter? It's like, I have a lot. It depends.
Yeah.
There are eras of fighters, and like depends on like if I'm looking for like that vicious knockout. If I want like a submission, I'm not going to watch an Anderson Silva fight.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm very big on like, there has to be a way for us to like track our, you know, favorite fights of all time, because I can't keep them all straight. There's a bunch that are up there that I remember, but like knockouts can happen like that. It's not
Yeah.
like, you know, 7-game series in the ALDS.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. That's a perfect point. Yeah, and I mean, I think as the UFC gets way more talented, like before it was like there's a couple guys at the top. Now it's like 1 through
Yeah.
10 are killers.
Dude,
So
the middleweight division is just terrifying these
yeah,
days.
yeah. And so like as the talent grows and people get more skilled, we're going to see crazier and like crazier like finishes. Like that Leon Edwards head kick. Like one of the craziest fights like ever. An absolute Hail Mary. And I feel like that is something like if you watch that in full speed, you cannot appreciate how incredible it is. That is something where a UFC strike moment is like the best thing possible because you can just watch it. You can see all the angles, the slow-mo, and there's the sound too. Like
Yeah, you
it's
get the
so
commentators talking about how he's like getting smoked and like, or
yeah,
whatever, like he's done. He like is just trying to survive at this point. And then perfect technique,
incredible.
one
Yeah.
of the greatest knockouts of all time. Just
Yeah,
insane.
and it is such a perfect use case for like why moments like as you were saying are just far superior than a static like piece of cardboard or even a static like JPEG. So
It's a
going back,
testament to the IP of UFC, really. Like
yeah,
they have incredible IP, and like the sound elevates it. I see it so much on like Twitter or other socials. People are like, the sound elevates it. And I'm like, yeah.
yeah,
I remember, I don't watch fights with the sound off.
yeah,
Like it really does. It's a full package in like a, you know, very small dose, but like I don't need to watch the whole Leon Edwards Kamaru Usman fight to remember how I felt in that moment. I
yes,
just need to watch that moment and I can go, holy,
yeah.
I'll
When you're
probably
watching.
never see anything like this again.
Yeah, when you're trying to find your favorite like Steph Curry highlight or Giannis highlight, you don't watch the entire game and they're like, oh, that's when it happened. Like you watch the highlight. And so I agree completely. Like just having that highlight of the kick, you already watched the fight. You have like a vague memory of how it went up to that point, but that's the moment where you won't forget, you know?
Yeah, it's like the perfect TLDR. Like it
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
everything buttoned up right there.
100%. So did you go to the UFC X event that you guys that was being put on? Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. It was
Okay.
super fun. It was crazy. The people
Cool.
love Valentina Shevchenko and Charles Oliveira and Holly Holm
Yeah.
and Andrei Arlovsky. Honestly, it was
And
crazy.
it was insane that they all showed up. Like that was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I was following on Twitter and I feel like that might have been the biggest FOMO moment I've ever had like with like Top Shot or All Day or anything. Like there's been some really cool things that all three platforms have put on, but this was the first one where it's like I could tangibly be there. Like I didn't have to like win this crazy contest or own these moments and have a chance. Like that would have been something really, really cool to go to. And just like randomly, like these huge fighters are showing up. The set looked like absolutely incredible. Like the booth, it just seemed like everyone who was there, whether they were tapped into NFTs or like had no idea what Strike was or anything in between, was like having an incredible time and like really, really got like more than they ever dreamed of, like going to that booth.
Yeah, I mean, Meg Patton, you know Meg, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
She's a
She's
wizard
incredible.
Yeah, she's incredible. Britt O'Hagan, who I work with she's on partnerships. She was incredible. They set this whole thing up and we like showed up there for 2 days and it was just like we did not expect as many people. I don't think we expected as many people to show up for the autographs that did show up. And so like I'm taking pictures, people are handing me their cell phones. I'm like taking pictures of them and like Charles Oliveira. They're coming up to me, handing me their phones, thanking me. They're like, "Thank you so much." And I'm like, he's over here. Like, just do your thing. I'm over here. But it was a weird energy, like in a good way. Like the moments playing in the background, people were looking up. Valentina going up and like pointing at her moment and like just standing next to it for a second, reading the description of it. It was like pretty cool.
That's awesome.
The whole UFC X was fun. Like it was pretty electric and like, you know, you'd hear a pop in the corner of like the fans going crazy and it's like, oh, Michael Chandler's here or whatever it was. But like our booth might have been like one of the only ones with like seating, like a sitting area. So it got very popular for that as well.
That's big brain thinking by Meg.
That was seriously, but all like top to bottom, it was like super polished. Yeah, I don't even know how many hundreds of people ended up going through that. But
that's so cool. Yeah, it looked incredible. The booth looked incredible. It looked like everyone was having a good time. Like I said, I was like, gosh, I want to be there. It's the first time where I've really felt like I was missing out on something. And I feel like the
plenty more opportunities.
Yeah, I feel like there is. You guys there's been so much you guys have been doing. Like just like even the small meetups you're doing, like the one you did in San Diego recently. I think you guys did one in London too, right?
We did one in Paris as well.
In Paris, yeah. Like that's
and London.
Yeah. I think that's so cool too, because like you guys are like being able to include the international fans and give them an opportunity to participate. And I know like we talked earlier, UFC is like a more global sport, which gives you that unique opportunity. But I love that you guys are taking that opportunity instead of letting it pass by and being like, well, we'll focus on the US stuff. Like that's our main market. I think that's so, so cool. And I think we'll continue to see more UFC fighters from other countries, like really like latch onto that part of it. Because like a lot of these sports, they don't have like opportunities for their fans to enjoy something necessarily because like, oh, you're not in this country or in this city even. So I think that's a really cool opportunity too.
We have some rabid international collectors, some individuals who are just lovely people, but they are such insane UFC fans, and I love them for it because I think you're right. Like they don't have much beyond that in certain instances, or like I know many that will like very much enjoy like football, like soccer, not American football.
Football.
But yeah, UFC is one that they like very like feel like they can track very well. Sorry, I'm getting like a bunch of notifications all of a sudden.
Mr. Popular.
I think my phone just went out of.
Is Dana hitting you up? Is it time?
Oh no, not Dana. Phew. That would be horrifying, actually. If I get a text from Dana, I'm gonna be like, this is either a scam or I did something very bad. There's no possible way. It's a good thing. So yeah.
Okay. So getting back to like the actual product, we talked a lot about kind of the UFC and UFC Strike working in tandem. Let's talk about like UFC Strike specifically. So you guys dropped Series 0 and then quickly followed up with Series 1, and we're still in Series 1. And there's not exactly any roadmap or any like dates that we have. So is there a point where Series 1 is going to stop? Like, how do you guys determine when we're moving on to Series 2? Is there going to be some roadmap, maybe not for Series 1, maybe in the future for Series 2 or something, where people like me on the outside collectors, we can be like, oh, like this is what we're aiming for. I know there's going to be this many contender moments. There's going to be this many rares. I think you guys done a really good job at not releasing tons at once. I'm someone who doesn't like have the bandwidth to get every single moment, but I own every single contender moment because when you guys do a drop, you're like, oh, here's 3. I'm like, I can get 3. I don't have to go buy 200 in one pop or like 50 in one pop. And so it's like, and these are fighters. Once again, I think you guys have done a good job curating like the right picks because they're all fighters for the most part. Where I'm like, oh, this is a fighter I want to have anyway. Like I'll take their contender moment. Like you guys, I had the Sugar Sean O'Malley.
I saw you stacking those.
Yeah,
I was jealous.
I had the challenger moment because I was like, oh, I won his debut. But then you guys released a contender, and I was like, oh, okay, like I'm going hard on this. Like, and he's not even my favorite fighter, but I think he's such an exciting fighter with such a bright future, especially from that drop. I think he has like the highest ceiling, and I was like, okay, like I'm going to grab like a chunk of these. I might have gone a little overboard, but at that point I just seen the leaderboard. And I was like, I need to be top 3. Like I can't let all these other people pass me up. So I made my stamp there. But once again, that happened because I wasn't like, oh, I have to get 40 new contender moments. I was like, oh, there's like 5. So you know what?
Right.
I have a little extra Dapper. I'm going to stack the one I really, really, really like here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the broadest guidance we've released, or rather the most specific guidance we released, is probably around the champion moments, which we said we'd only mint to 3,000. We'd only mint 3,000 total in Series 0 and Series 1. And so to answer your question, without answering your question, we're pretty far along on that track for Series 1. So like in terms of how many champion moments have been released. So Series 1 is well along. I don't think we've set a date or finalized when like we'll officially launch like a Series 2 or anything, but yeah, I forget the exact amount of champion moments that are out in circulation now, but it's approaching 3,000.
Interesting. So using that as kind of a barometer would be a good idea of when Series 2 is coming to a start, probably.
I think that's a fair assessment, and you can like we had for the Champion Club airdrop, it was 1430.
Oh
members,
yeah,
or something like that. And then like Yanez was like, we minted that to the amount of champion moments that were out there.
Yeah, which is
and so
close to 3,000. Now that you point that out, I forgot that is a tool we could use. Just looking at that moment.
So we haven't announced when it's going to be, and like it's not like imminent. Like, but yeah, we're well along, I would say, and like Series 0 was kind of quick.
Yeah,
and then got into Series 1, and it's like that. We published that update about the champion moment count coming down. Like that was months ago now. So like it's definitely been like drawn out, right?
Yeah.
The good news is that like we feel, I appreciate that. I think like we found that we had to like really sort of, like put out some fires early on, and there were some things that needed to be like addressed urgently. Like there was like some sentiment issues and supply issues, of course,
and the UI, I would imagine as well.
Oh my goodness, I was a collector, so me. I also was, and we had talked about that.
You and I had talked about it a lot.
Yeah. The UI was just, I was like, we're not ready for showtime, and like it feels so good to be in a place where like we're not done, far from it, but it feels like okay, we have the rails in place to take this somewhere, and so to like tether that or like tie that to your question about when does Series 1 end, it feels like we're finally getting into like a really good rhythm and routine. So hopefully we're wrapping this thing up, not too long, but we have a lot of champion moments. Not a lot of champion moments, like it's super rare, but we have a lot out of the ones that we have said that we will release in Series 1. A lot have already been in packs.
Got it. When Series 2 drops, do you think there's going to be some sort of roadmap involved, or will it kind of be this one where we're like, hey, like it's a little in the dark, but we're also not going to like rug you by dropping just tons and tons and tons of moments and like just oversupplying?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that just yet. I don't think we'll come out with like a definitive roadmap, and I'll hopefully answer this in a decent way, or like justify it well.
Yeah.
Roadmaps, like the best projects that I've seen, like will publish a roadmap, but then they like don't deliver against the roadmap. They deliver against some internal roadmap that is important to them, that is so much better than what they've released to the public, because you don't tell people what you're going to do and then like just deliver that. then you just met expectations, and that's not enough in this space. So I don't think we'll come out and give away everything. I think our goal is to give enough guidance that everyone has an equitable experience. That's a very general way of saying it, but we will give the guidance that is necessary to make the right decisions on the product without sacrificing the ability for us to make decisions and innovate and recognize that we're sort of like building something a little bit more novel, than a little bit more bespoke than it's not linear, I guess.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic thing early on.
Yeah.
Like even I think
and even Series 1, like we've been like 3 months ago, we didn't know when everything would necessarily come out. It is a lot of putting things together. The nice thing about that is that we aren't fit into some sort of like predefined destiny. We're making the best decisions for the product in real time. We are always trying to plan ahead, but we are also agile and willing to adapt. Yeah. Because we're not going to just do something because we said we might do it. And that's where the roadmap becomes like tricky for me.
No, I mean, I think a great, like the perfect example of that was Series 3 with Top Shot, where they put out a roadmap and everyone was so excited about it at the time. Like, and they gave themselves a lot of like boundaries. They're like, hey, like we're being very specific and trying to be transparent with people here. And it ended up, like, long story short, we know it ended up causing oversupply, but we knew, like, reading the roadmap, you knew that it was built for like bringing on new users. It was oversupply if there weren't going to be no users, but a lot of people couldn't see the big picture. And as a result, we reached this point where people turned on the roadmap, the thing that they were super excited about. And then Top Shot was like, well, we're kind of locked in. Like, this is what we promised. And like everything's so early, things can change. Like what if Top Shot had put out the roadmap before that massive February boom, and then they're like, yeah, we're stuck making very little moments because our user base is so small. Yeah, like that would have been even worse for the platform, like long term.
Oh, so that would have been terrible.
Yeah, so I think it is funny because we're in Top Shot world, we're waiting for the Series 4 roadmap. Everyone thinks like as soon as it's going to drop, like everything's fixed, and it's like I don't know. I definitely kind of agree with you that like things are so early, keeping things dynamic and just like building that trust with your user where you're like, hey, we're not going to like absolutely like just milk you for money and leave you with something that we don't think is valuable. Like because we're all in this together. Like we all love the UFC. We want to add value to the UFC and we want to be a companion to the UFC. And there's a unique like symbiotic relationship between the UFC Strike and collectors, you know?
Yeah, I'd like to, don't get me wrong, I want to like highlight that it's still very important for us, or in lieu of a roadmap, it becomes even more important for us to have buttoned up communications and everything.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely with you that like your question about having a roadmap, we need some form of a roadmap. I don't think it'll come across in the way that like people think of a roadmap. Like you see like, you know, dotted line to this thing and then it's like artistic and like all that. I think of the roadmap as more like if you're following along, no matter where you're at, you have a general sense, you understand where it's going, new things come out, you're educated on it, you're communicated about it via email, via Discord, whatever necessary mechanism you've opted into.
Yeah.
Like that's, I think, clear communication versus broad generalities and like a broad sort of like, let's make this roadmap happen, which I think roadmaps can work. Mm-hmm. They just oftentimes are more like letdown machines than they are, you know, beacons or like the lighthouse in the storm, so to speak. They're typically more of a distraction than they are a net positive.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that because I think the big thing for me was early on, especially with Series 1, like you guys did the first couple of drops and I was just like, when does this end? Like I plan on collecting every contender moment, but I know the Top Shot base set is like 500 moments. So am I going to run out of steam here and be in this weird position where they're like, oh yeah, Series 1 is still going. And I'm like, I didn't think it would be. So I do think
Yeah.
it's been really cool that you guys have like done you've shown a lot of restraint by just making every drop like actually meaningful. But yeah, I think some sort of just like knowing when a series starts, when it ends, general amount of like what moments, like how many moments should be minted, or like just like some
Yep.
basic ballpark numbers. I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and I think those can, whether that's in a roadmap or whether that's in other communication, like I think those are things that me as a collector, both on
Mhm.
Top Shot and on Strike, that's information that I would want and I would need and expect. And I definitely appreciate the collectors that have been around since Series Zero and like now through Series One, because I think our communication, like especially early on, was not great. And like I
Yeah.
think it's improved a lot, but still there's a lot of, nuance that we have to like get better about.
It
And
definitely has gotten better as someone who's remained
I
a collector.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I come from the perspective where like I'm a UFC diehard first and foremost. Like I was like that's where I started. I was a UFC fan before I collected Top Shot before I started working at Dapper.
Mhm.
But I kind of have like that collector, fan, and Dapper employee, like the three-headed sort of view into this thing. And so the things you're saying to me, I'm like, yeah, Jeb, why are you saying that to me? Of course, I know that. Like I'm a collector with you, man. I know that. But you're right. It's like things that haven't necessarily been done. And I hope that we've proven on Series Zero and Series One that like what we've done is not how it will be. We only intend to make it better. And
Yeah.
so I'm excited for Series Two. That feels like it'll be a very big page turn
Yeah, I
for
think so
everyone.
too. And speaking of things not being the same, I think that's a perfect transition into talking more about Series Zero, because when you guys dropped it, it was a
Yeah.
24,000 mint count, which we now know quite a bit more than we saw in Series One.
Yeah.
And to your guys' credit, in something where maybe having a roadmap, to your point, would have been a hindrance, is you guys were like, oh, let's pivot. Let's make a real, like tangible pivot here. And we're going to aggressively burn these moments. We are going to provide opportunities for you guys to burn your moments and get actual meaningful, valuable moments. As opposed to a 1 out of 24,000 Hamzat, you now have a Hamzat who is worth the same value as some champion moments, because people are like, oh yeah, I want his rare. Like I'd much rather have that than a 1 out of 24,000. You guys did this. You guys have done a really good job, I think, with the creativity, with burning. Also, I think UFC Strike out of the three had the potential to be easily the most predictive, where you could just front run it because you're like, oh look, I look at the card, it has the fighters. These are the ones I
Yep.
need. And as someone who like that's like one of my guilty pleasures, and some of my contents around that, and it's like almost my niche. Like even with this last burn challenge, I thought for sure, I was so convinced you was like, oh, 5 gone, 5 to Avasa. This is a no-brainer. Like you got to burn more of them. There's less than 1,000 of each burn. And instead you guys were like, oh, well, let's get a Nagano in there who hasn't had a lot of burn because he's probably one of the most valuable and best fighters in Series Zero. Let's get a Kai Kara France who we didn't burn in his last fight. I thought that was really, really cool. But that being said, I think like right now, Chicharito's at almost 4,000 burn. So that means he has 20,000 moments still, which is still at the very least 8,000 above the highest minted Series 1 moment. So my question is there a rough goal for like the final circulation of Series 0? Like I'm sure you can't give me like the actual numbers, but like do you guys want Series 0 to be rarer than Series 1? Do you want it to be like the definitive cornerstone and like the genesis of UFC Strike, or is it just like in tangent with Series 1?
It's a good question. I think Series Zero will always be like a bit of an anomaly for all of the things that we've discussed, or that you just like kind of outlined there. I think we probably we're like happy with the burn challenges so far. I think we have more aggressive ambitions than what has been done thus far. I think we're like again thrilled. Proof of concept done. Like we've shown that we can do these things. Now it's like how do we do more of it.
Mhm.
Series Zero needs to like we're I think still a long ways away from even having the unfortunately the not a long ways, but just like in terms of the counts still
Yeah.
from having the conversation around like is it going to be more is it going to flip series one because
Yeah.
I'll be interested in seeing that happen. I think our goal will be for it always to be in an organic sort of like non-system threatening way, and like we've seen that even with burn challenges, series zero floor recover above series one floor regardless of the discrepancy in mint count, which is just kind of wonky. So
Yeah.
it's like a delicate balance of like you want to scale it elegantly without
Hmm.
causing any like crazy shocks. Because it would be weird if like, the S0 floor was like 2x the S1 floor for contender moments,
Yeah,
but we
that's a good
hadn't burned
point.
anything more.
Yeah, I didn't even really think about that, but that's actually such a good point.
We don't want it just to be viewed as like trade tickets or anything like that necessarily. And it also goes back to like a lot of these moments, like I like them. So I'm like, hey, why would you want to burn that? Well,
Yeah.
to get a more ultra rare Kamzat. Like I would have done the Kamzat burn if I could have. So like as far as like Series Zero goes, I don't think we have any prescribed endpoint just yet. I think the goal is to always make sure that the supply is where it needs to be, and it's
Hmm.
not right now. So like once we get the supply where it like is in a good place, then I think we'll have the luxury of being like, do we make this the cornerstone of everything? I kind of like as a blockchain enthusiast, I believe in provenance and I believe in like, Series Zero was the first. So inherently it has a premium, but like TBD if we'll like do anything that's like really built around that as a cornerstone.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually that's not the answer I expected, but that's actually really cool. That because like yeah, I guess having how you pointed out, like shocking the UFC strike economy probably wouldn't be a good thing for it overall big picture. If you're just like, oh, let's burn like a ton of these like right away, and then just like UFC strike explodes in price and it never like recovers where it's supposed to be, even though like Chicharito right now is at $8 and he's only had 4,000 burns. So he's still significantly more minted than Series 1 moments, and some of these Series 1 are going for like $3. So
Yep.
I think I think that's a really, really interesting point there. So
It's all
kind
very
of
nuanced and complex and like I don't have all the answers. None of us do. But
hmm,
we're gonna try to figure it out
so,
as we go.
yeah, so kind of leading into that question to continue to go with that, we all know that Top Shot has a Top Shot economist. Does UFC Strike have a designated economist?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Um I think he might work on like some other things too, but he like builds our scenarios out and everything like that. Yeah, I get to work pretty closely with him and he works with many others that I get to collaborate with. It's a very collaborative environment. We also work with a game designer on sort of like on like what challenges will look like, what's the
Oh wow.
reward, what's the like hook, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a weirdly creative. It's both science and art, but it's weirdly like it's very fun to work
Hmm.
with them on finding the balance. Like what does
Yeah.
click,
I
economy wise and game wise.
that makes sense. I mean, yeah, that's what I like to speculate on and make my content on because it's so much fun. So that
Yep.
makes sense. And I know,
Game theory over everything. I love
yeah,
anything game theory.
exactly. And I know you've said in the past, like that the UFC Strike team is pretty relatively small. So it sounds like I mean you guys use that for your benefit, where everyone's involved in everything. So there's not this chance of miscommunication because someone who's taking care of something over here has zero clue about something that's going on over here.
Yeah, it's like relatively flat in terms of like hierarchy and just it's a lot of like it almost feels like the whole team is just like constantly in conversation. We are a lot of the times, like literally, but I'm constantly working with people across the different verticals. We're just not there's not a ton of not a ton of us, so it's very easy for me to talk to the game design side, to talk to the product side. There are downsides. Like there are cons, like in terms of like not having like endless resources. But the benefit is, like you mentioned, we all are like pretty well aligned on things, and we all feel pretty good. We also are very comfortable about speaking up. So like
That's really
people are
important.
willing to tell other people that it's a shitty idea.
Yeah.
I have shitty ideas all the time. It doesn't matter.
Everyone's gonna
It
have
just
them.
matters if I have a couple of good ones. And
Yeah.
as long as someone's there to tell me that, oh, that one's actually good. So it's been a very like fun experience in that way, because ideas come from everywhere, and like, again, good and bad, like that can cut both ways.
Yeah.
But like we probably come up with things that we wouldn't otherwise have come up with, just because we're a little bit more open and, you know, interested in like the comprehensive view versus like, how did I do today? There isn't a lot of that. I don't know how I'm doing. I know how the product is doing, and like what I need to do to help that product. And
Wow.
you know, what's happening over here? What are we thinking about the challenge this next week? Well, I know that we're also doing this, like we're launching starter packs maybe. So it's worth raising that, like this should be that should be considered in the challenge design. It's a very like living, breathing thing. Like the conversation feels never ending, in a good way, that like it's always sort of evolving, and we're always adding things on, taking things off. Yes, no, do we want that? But in the end, it allows us to do things that are a little bit more innovative and stand out and like less obvious. We try not to be lazy. We try not to do things that are predictable.
Yeah, and like I said, I thought for sure I would just be UFC Strike would be a money printer for me, because they're like, oh, this fight's happening. Let me buy at this moment. He fights in a month. People aren't like, it's not on their radar right now. And I think you guys have done a really good job of making it interesting. And that on my end makes it more fun too, because I'm not like, oh, enter in like the UFC card, buy those moments, forget about it, come back, repeat. Like it's like thinking along with you guys, like trying to figure out what could be used next time, looking at like mint counts and burns and all that stuff, and like it makes it a lot more, like you said, living and breathing product, which I think is really, really cool. So one thing with the UFC Strike moments that we haven't seen yet, that I know like Malik has kind of mentioned that it's eventually coming, is badges. So like I'm sure there's gonna be some point where we have like debut badges, and there's gonna be some other badges. I'm assuming that we don't have those badges because right now pretty much every moment would be a debut moment. So the badges would not add anything. If anything, it would just clutter right now. When do you
I think that's fair.
Yeah. When do you think like we reach that point of badges like making sense?
I think ultimately badges were not a priority early on because they would have not served much purpose early on.
Yeah.
And so like it's not a technical thing, or like it's not groundbreaking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like tagging a blog post. It's not that simple, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. I think it is one of those things that like the last 4 months have kind of been a blur. And so like it's like a lot of things come up, and you're like, oh yeah, we've been meaning to get to these things. Oh yeah, like we had to focus on the burning tool, or we had to onboard a new like CRM platform to email people, or whatever the case might have been. It feels like we're getting into that point now where we can start actually like thinking about those sort of like low hanging fruit items that like we've seen be successful on Top Shot and all day. So I don't think it's going to be long. I don't have like a timeline on it. No one's told me a timeline on it, but one thing I will say is that I'm very proud of like over the last several months, like I feel like our content has continued to improve in terms of like what's in the moments themselves, not like a, you know, video content or whatever. But like the actual moments themselves. Like I remember collecting Series 0, and there were just some that I'm like, I don't want this moment, but I'm going to complete the set, whatever.
Agreed.
And so badges, we're thinking about it in a similar way, how we're thinking about moments now, where it's like, we want these to be like, there aren't very many moments.
No,
like,
not at all.
We can't pull we can't print a lot of Michael Bisping moments, right? Like,
Yeah.
how many fights did he have?
Yeah.
Our hands are a little bit tied. So we need to make these things like count when we do them. Our shots need to count. And so like you said earlier, oh, it's nice that we don't have like a ton of new contender moments. We're not dropping 20 new contender moments in, you know, a random like pay-per-view pack. We're trying to make it meaningful. And that we're going to do the same thing with badges, where like the badges will, in my opinion, are inevitable. It's just like making sure we have that exact sort of like use case for them, where when we launch them, it's perfect. It's exactly what they're meant to do. And like you had mentioned, they didn't serve much purpose early on. But by series 2, like there are a couple Izzy moments out there. There are a couple Anderson, like there's moments out there. So
and I mean that's a great example. Like Izzy has he has his fandom moment and his champion moment. The champion moment doesn't need a badge, and the fandom moment will get, if that gets a debut badge, it's still the only like really like accessible moment for people to purchase. So why stick a badge on it right now?
And I think those are like, we don't have the answers to those things. That's the weirdest thing about the UFC strike, is that like we don't have a lot of these answers quite yet. But it is nice to not necessarily look 5 years down the road and be like, how many John Morant moments will there be? Because I did that as a collector, and I go,
like, there's a lot.
There's going to be a lot.
They could make a moment for John Morant pretty much every single game.
Just make it a POAP for every game that he plays in. You were there. Here you go.
He has a highlight reel like worthy moment every game. While with UFC, like best case scenario, a guy is fighting 3-4 times a year, and maybe he has 1, maybe 2 like moment worthy like highlights in those 4 fights. So it's definitely like where you guys have, like, you're almost forced to pick the cream of the crop, for better or for worse.
I like to think it's for better.
I think so too. I think so too.
I think it's like it goes against like everything we're doing if we like have like this IP that we talk about how it's such great IP, and like, you know, the UFC is just like so great to work with, and like they give us like audio, video, and then we do like a lame moment. It's just like, oh,
here's a player melt of Khabib's takedowns, not the submission, just the takedowns.
Just the takedowns. Or the one where he's like throwing those like overhand rights and like uppercuts from way outside the pocket and like totally missing the guy. He dominated the fight, but like it's just like a blooper reel basically. It's always been a little bit more limiting.
And it seems like you said, with just like the improvement of moments that we've seen from Series 0 to Series 1, like you guys have really like locked in on making sure that every moment counts. And I think that once again reflects in when you guys do releases. Like I've said it multiple times during this interview, but like we're not overwhelmed with like 20 new contender moments, 40 new contender moments. Like every moment seems to really count and be like special to some degree. Even if it's a common moment that's worth like $3 or $4, there's like the moment itself is really like high quality.
It's also like really hard to market something that is like 30 different products in one. And that was one thing, like early on, I just recall being, I wasn't the only one that felt this way. Multiple people felt this way, that it was like, we're not doing enough around, and I don't think we are yet either right now still, but talking about like letting each moment sort of stand on their own is like a huge draw. And I remember like even like NBA Top Shot legendary packs coming out, it's like a haul to get through like everything in the packs, and like, oh, I got the Charlotte Hornet logo. Oh, it's Gordon Hayward, not the LaMelo. Damn. UFC, it's kind of like, you know, it's a little bit easier to grasp, I think. And also like Lights Out is a perfect example. Like all those moments are just like insane. Like I'll watch any of them. If I'm scrolling through my feed and I see someone posted that video from YouTube or whatever, the moment itself, I'm stopping it. I'm stopping and I'm watching it. Any of them. And so it's like, how do we do more of that where there is no like sneaking in, content that might be lesser than. Like, we have enough good stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, we were so hungry for good stuff, we created a whole new NFT for it. The Hype NFT. Because we were like, these moments aren't enough for us, too limiting. So yeah.
No, I thought that was like it's something that I had kind of discussed a little bit, and other people too. I'm not saying I was the first person to be like, oh, like let's do this, but it was like, look, like the UFC is not, because it's like a once a week fight. There's like this buildup, and there's like iconic moments from the buildup that aren't part of the actual fight. And it's the same thing with the other sports as well, but I think UFC is particularly unique, where like you have like the panels where like people are asking the fighters questions, and you have Conor McGregor being like, who the fuck is this guy? And like that's like now that's like a meme. Like that's like a certified,
it's like in the zeitgeist.
Correct. Yeah. And that's not a part of the fight. It's him just like mouthing off. And it's the same thing with like Adesanya has had like multiple moments where like he's doing like the hand motions before, and then like he has the dance. He just had the Undertaker walk in.
That was sick.
That was wild. He had that one UFC fighter who like got the Pokeball and like threw it and then like caught him after he knocked him. Like there's so many like really cool moments that would fall outside of a traditional moment for Strike. And I think that's really cool that you guys have so far made it like where it's not so much like a monetary thing. Like you said, you're allowing to stand on its own, where it's like, hey, this might not be like super valuable, but like this is cool to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's like my favorite things in UFC are the fights, yes, but like 90% of my favorite things in the UFC have happened outside of the cage.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm with you that it just felt like an obvious way like for people to connect to their fandom without having to be like, oh, I'm going to go collect the individual's fight. Because like what you said, to your point, like 10 times as many people, 100 times as many people have probably 100 times have seen the who the fuck is that guy meme versus actually watch the fight that came from.
Correct.
It's like the sheer reach, the sheer like cultural impact of it. And the UFC is super unique in that way that it's like so much happens outside of the cage. In fact, you don't care what's going on inside the cage unless what's happening outside of it is good. Yeah. Typically, unless
Colby
really elite.
Perfect example of that.
Even like Sean O'Malley, where it's like he's a perfect example of someone who just like took the opportunity, took the platform, and just maximized the out of everything he could.
Yeah.
And like I respect, like, do I think he's gonna beat Petr Yan? I don't know. Like that doesn't seem like a good matchup for Sean O'Malley. He could do it.
He could.
But I still am just like, he's here. He got that fight somehow when nobody else would have been able to get that fight in his position.
100%.
So yeah. And I appreciate that, like, we've integrated that a little bit, and we need to integrate that more. And like, Hype is going to continue being a fun outlet for us.
Like a good example is like I just mentioned the Undertaker entrance by Adesanya. That fight wasn't particularly moment worthy, right?
Yep.
But it would be a shame to lose that opportunity to be like, oh, this was like a moment. Like, yes, the fight, he didn't have a crazy knockout or anything like super meaningful that we'd want to capture in like an actual moment, but it adds to the story of who Adesanya is. And like the larger than life, internet savvy, like persona he's built, where he's like, oh, I'm going to do this because I know it's going to get a reaction. It's going to go like semi-viral. It's going to hit these pockets that maybe like aren't super aware of me or have lost touch. And they're like, oh, that Adesanya guy, I've heard of him. Let me go catch up. And now, oh, I'm invested. I found his YouTube. I found like him on the like Joe Rogan podcast or a different podcast or something like that. And it starts the whole cycle with like bringing those fans back in.
Yeah, Izzy's incredible with that. Like, it almost made the fight okay.
Yeah.
It was almost like the entrance was the performance, and that he was going in there to just like, like not get KO'd. He knew he could like take the points and walk away. and he'll have another entrance to continue building the narrative next time.
Yeah.
I've always been the biggest fan of like the showmen and showwomen of the sport, because
Yeah.
like I think that is such an incredibly huge part of all of this. And it's also why I like why I was a UFC Strike fan, because I was like, this is the shit that gets me hyped. This is the stuff that gets me excited. Like the people that are doing like the crazy knockouts and then like the shoey afterwards.
Yeah.
That's why I stacked the time moment, because I'm like, the shoey's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's a big part of things. And so I really appreciate the athletes that like fully lean into that. And I think you're going to see a lot of them in hype NFTs and such, and because they're so prevalent in the internet culture, really.
Definitely. What do you think the priorities of UFC Strike is short-term and long-term here? Because I think you guys have knocked some short-term things out. Like obviously the infrastructure and UI was like a pretty big deal, and you guys are making some big improvements there. And I'm sure there's some short-term goals there as well. But what else is on the radar?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head that like fixing UI issues was like a big blocker to like feeling good about doing more. It was also a lot about just like streamlining communication, operations. How do we get better about doing these things in a more predictable way for us? The collectors don't need to be able to predict everything. We do. Like we need to be buttoned up on these things. So really, I think it's still a lot of, and like I don't mean to make this sound like desperate, but like a lot of it is just like I feel like almost like every day is like it's another fight for survival. That like we don't necessarily have the luxury of looking five years down the road or 2 years down the road. That it's like we got to crush this next week, and what we're doing next week needs to align with what we're doing the following week, and whatever we're doing next week that we can do to help the following week, we should do that. And then think about the week after that. It feels like we're like, building the plane in flight a lot of the times, but at the same time, like it's writing the story in real time. So when I think about a long-term plan, I don't think about anything concrete just yet. I think about a lot of ideas that we have around what we could do. And I think it involves, to be general, it involves basically building like the UFC fan experience around this product. Like, how do you make this the quintessential UFC super fandom route in terms of how you interact with the UFC? Because we believe it can sort of serve as your passport of sorts of fandom. Says who you are as a UFC fan. And you can extrapolate that to all these different ways where it's like you have this moment in your wallet, but like there's also a fight of that moment on Fight Pass, right? How does that work? Does that integrate? And there's a fight card this weekend and you want to make picks. How does that work? Whatever a UFC fan wants to do, UFC Strike needs to be able to integrate into that and be a core part of that. So that's the long-term focus, is like to ingrain it in UFC fandom, where just like you line up for, tickets because you're in Fight Club or something to get, pre-sale. Well, you're going to go to UFC Strike because there's a pack drop next week, or there's, a new moment being released direct to market, whatever the case might be. We want it to be like really like the complementary thing to the fandom that enhances it, not replaces it. We're not trying to replace anything. We're just trying to like slot in a way that makes sense, where you can be like, hey, I'm the biggest Josh Emmett fan. No, really, I am. Seriously. And this is just how I show it. This is what I do for it. And I get benefits for it, like the private Discord, or I buy a champion moment to get into Champion Club, whatever the case might be. So
that's a good point.
That's super vague, super broad blue sky, but like
I like that answer a lot. I think that's a really good way of looking at things. You don't see like a predetermined end goal, and you guys are like, look, like we think there's a lot here to run with, but we don't know. And I think because of that outlook, you guys have just been consistently building momentum. Like I don't think there's been like any like major slip ups or just like obvious missteps where we're like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? And the excuse is like, oh, like 10 years down the road, this won't matter. But like you said, every week it really does feel like you guys are like bringing something unique to the table where it's not predictable, it's not phoned in, it's creative, and it makes sense at like what the product is right now at this very moment. Once again, with the whole Gone to Avasa like burn challenge, I thought that was a very interesting way to approach it. Where like I mean I was assuming, like I said, 5 Gone, 5 to Avasa, they both shoot up to about 25 to 30 each, and instead it's like, hey, we're gonna spread it out a little more and like continue to get towards a general goal that we want. And I think it really shows in like all your answers where you're like, look, like we don't have like a definitive number for burn challenges. We don't have a definitive end of how many exact moments we won in series one. Like you guys are really kind of playing it by ear. And I weirdly, if you would have asked me that like months ago, I'd been like, no, that's such a dumb idea.
Terrible.
Like, yeah, like we need a roadmap. We need them to stick to
Yeah.
this no matter what. But I think the proof of concept is there, where it's like clear that the team is all on the same page, and like you said earlier, you guys are aligned with the UFC as well. So you guys aren't butting heads with them. You guys all are like, okay, this is where we're going, and I think that's really really cool. And as an avid UFC collector, UFC Strike collector, who has gotten way more into UFC because of UFC Strike, that all
I
of
love
this
to
like
hear
really
that.
excites me. Yeah, I'm a big Adesanya fan. I've listened to every Adesanya interview he's ever done, like all this stuff.
Tremendous.
I know tons of big fighters and stuff like that, but I didn't know like names. I didn't really watch like prelims necessarily. Like if they were on, sure, but I wasn't going out of my way to see the entire card. I was just like, oh, I want to make sure I catch these couple of fights or something like that. And I know a fighter's face. Like, I'd be like, oh yeah, I've seen him fight. Didn't know the name, stuff like that. Definitely very much a casual fan, and I feel like UFC Strike has taught me a lot about the UFC and like really like excited me to like the sport as a whole, as opposed to like, oh, this fighter is really cool. That's why I want to watch it. Like Adesanya is just masterful, incredible striker. But guess what? There's a lot of other strikers that are really interesting to watch, like Volk and like Holloway and like all these other guys that like may not have the biggest like social media presence outside of the ring. But
Yep.
I feel like UFC Strike has really allowed me to take a chance on a lot of fighters where I'm like, oh, they're releasing this moment. I've heard of this fighter. Obviously, if they're releasing a moment, he's probably got a fight coming up. I'll watch the fight, and I'm like, oh wow, like I actually really like this fighter. Like he's an incredible fighter.
And you kind of said it early on that like we're growing with the sport.
Yeah,
So it's very cool when like every card that comes out, there's new fighters that have never fought before in the UFC that I'm like, I've never watched this person fight. And I consider myself a diehard.
yeah,
And like maybe I've seen him fight in other promotions, but like there's plenty of instances where I'm like, I've never heard of this person.
yeah,
And so like I feel like I'm like investing in that person now. Not I can't collect obviously, but like even just watching them fight, I'm like, okay, making a mental note, like if and that's their chance to like earn my fandom basically. But
yeah.
I feel like MMA is so like approachable and like so many different points of interest for people, whether it's like Conor McGregor's interviews or Izzy's dance moves or like how much he loves anime.
Yeah.
Or it's because this person is like an amazing karate fighter. There's so many different ways that you might be interested in mixed martial arts and UFC.
Even from the meme perspective, like the Usman memes that were going out were like incredible. Like,
Seriously. And so it's like, so what is someone that finds that interesting or funny? Like what would their experience with like how do they get more interested in UFC? Well, they probably want to see like more knockouts. Or maybe they want more memes or funny moments. But
mhm.
like good news is the UFC's got plenty of both. Like
Yeah.
there's 30 seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. There's a lot of drunk clips that we can pull from. There's a lot of different, tweets or whatever. Paulo Costa's Twitter account is like the greatest thing in the world.
Dude is unhinged. He does not give a damn.
Unbelievable. But yeah, it's just like it's a odd sport in that way. That like why I'm watching it might not be why you're watching it. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's not really the case with like baseball.
Yeah.
Like you don't accidentally watch the Cubs and the Reds or like the Mets
Yeah.
and the Braves.
I don't
Like,
watch a random basketball game being like,
right.
oh, what are the bench players going to do when someone scores? Are they going to like throw up like the double threes or the single threes? Like, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What color's the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, am I gambling here or what? UFC is like a very like almost like lifestyle weirdly thing. And I think a lot of fans live that way, where it's like you go to work and then you have fights on the weekends, and you know, it's just like,
yeah, and you can follow along on Twitter, see highlights on Twitter.
It's not like, you know, super intensive where like, how'd my pitcher do last night, or how, like, am I winning in fantasy baseball? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's
I haven't set my lineup
yeah,
in
and
months.
to its benefit, I think is it's not super stat intensive. You
Oh,
have like
no.
baseball is crazy, like just nothing but numbers. And even with basketball now, with all the advanced stats, we're getting into some very interesting conversations. I saw someone say that Jokic is a top 10. If he never played again, he is a top 10 all-time offensive player. And I was like,
whoa.
I do not know what advanced stats you were reading, but that is an insane take. But with the UFC, you do not even have to be aware that stats are being like tabulated. You
Look
don't
at
have
the
to
Kamaru Usman Leon Edwards fight.
exactly. Yeah.
Those stats didn't matter at all.
Yeah.
And that's like baseball, basketball, so many other sports. You have 7-game series. You have like plenty of time to weed out the anomalies.
Mm-hmm.
In UFC, it's Kamaru doesn't get to play again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
It's all or
he
nothing.
will get a rematch, but like, damn, this ain't game 2 of the, you know, NL conference series. Like this is like, now he needs like vengeance for getting knocked the fuck out after dominating a fight.
Yeah.
It's just totally different thing. And like, I love this sport like so much. It's so different. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, no, same here. And it's like such a it's a as someone who can be like a bit of a math person who just dives into numbers and stuff, and like I enjoy like a level of fantasy football or fantasy basketball, and like especially with like Top Shot and stuff, I'm definitely guilty of being like, oh, like, like he just put up a triple double, he's averaging like blah blah. UFC, like you can just truly like sit back and enjoy it, and I'm not worrying about like the significant strike count because that like you said, that really doesn't matter. And all the good fighters will say, I can't let the judges decide who wins because they're like, look, I should be winning these fights outright. And there's just nothing like that in most sports.
I have never been much of a stat head for UFC. I think it matters in like very close contests sometimes. Like if you have like 2 ultra elite kickboxers going against each other, where I'm like, shit, this might be like 80 significant strikes versus like 70 significant strikes, and like one's doing more damage to the legs and one, but like it becomes so nuanced that, and then like you never know what the judges are going to do.
Yeah.
There've been plenty of fights that I'm like, yeah, that was pretty impressive performance, and the guy lost, and you're like, wait a minute.
When you
I think that's another nice thing.
Yeah, when you see fighters like Cormier and experts like Joe Rogan being like, what? Like how did this person win? Like it's the same. Yeah. It's like what is going on here?
It gets a little weird when that happens. But I also appreciate that they will like openly talk shit. Yeah, criticize basically, instead of just being like, you know,
going along for the brand type of deal.
Yeah, or like try to like muffle it a bit, or like make it be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, when it's like, well, it actually might be a big deal.
So with a couple more questions, I think we can wrap it up. So obviously, like at the end of the day, you're a Dapper employee. Dapper has Top Shot all day and UFC Strike. So you guys, like, while you're separate products, you kind of guys are all on the same team. And like you said, like Meg is a great example. Like she does stuff for Top Shot, she does stuff for Strike. Like she's for all day. Yeah, she's organizing all these events across the board. So is there any like advantage of having Top Shot, who's been around for a while, and all day? Like, are you guys communicating with them, asking how their approaching different problems? Do you guys collaborate on things behind the scenes?
Yeah, I would say it's largely been it's mostly been us being UFC Strike having the privilege of learning from a lot of what's already happened. Like I was a collector on Top Shot when, like early days, and like saw the sort of rise and the decline and where it's at now. I wouldn't say we've done like a ton of collaboration on anything like specific, but there's like a good amount of knowledge share, whether it's across the different products we're using for like our tech stack, for marketing or whatever the case might be, or if it is something around like a promotion that they did, what did well, what didn't do well. It's great to learn from them because they have just like Top Shot's done so much already that we've been able to pull a lot from them. But also, I wouldn't say that we're all trying to do the same things. So it's all very like, we go do things and then we come back and we say what we've learned, and then like we'll each like take what the others tested and found to be successful and try to spin it in our own way. But I think we also want to make sure like it's organic and it makes sense. And what might work on NFL, it might not work on UFC or vice versa or NBA. The simplest way to frame that, what I'm trying to say is we speak a lot and we work together a lot, but ultimately like we treat each product like, I would say, quite unique, distinct, treated as such. So it's a healthy balance, really. Like there's not a lot of like overreach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's cool to hear because why reinvent the wheel every time? You gotta
It's also like,
learn.
think about it like you have multiple incubators basically. Like we can be testing things and iterating on things, and all day can be testing and iterating on things. Like we can do things faster than if like I have to test them and learn myself. They can test it and like give me like, it might still be worth testing on our side, but like I can at least have some sort of data to take away from that.
Okay, so
before I go do it myself.
Yeah, so using that as I think a good example here, and something I would love to get more insight on, has to do with mixed packs then, because UFC has released a lot of mixed packs early on, maybe a little on the expensive side, but I think you guys have like absolutely crushed it now, where people like no matter what they pull, they're pretty stoked. Like if I pull 3 contenders, I'm like, was guaranteed this like Sean O'Malley. So I didn't hit the challenger, but I still feel like I got what I paid for. Like I feel like I didn't like it wasn't like some scam. Like I got like a premium fighter, like Sugar Sean O'Malley, someone very recognizable, and like I'm pretty happy with that. I like if I lost money theoretically, it's not like an insane amount. Like I feel like you guys have really, really just like perfected the mixed pack, and we've seen like Top Shot had some issues with mixed packs where they weren't doing a great job. And I think even all day at the beginning, they're like, oh, yeah, $250, or I don't remember how much the number was, but they were like, oh, they were charging way more for 3 moments compared to what they're doing now. So have you guys been able to learn just like watching that, but also like talking with them and maybe like looking at the data behind it in order to like figure out really what exactly you guys are looking for?
And I think I probably could have been more specific in the last answer that like I work mostly in like marketing. So like our marketing teams, like it's mostly idea sharing. Our economists work much more closely together. So in terms of the example you referenced, it's like, they had conversations across those products around like what worked, what didn't. I said something earlier about like how we don't necessarily have like an endpoint. Like we have like numbers that we are going for and like general like indicators, with the acknowledgement that like things change very quickly in this space, and we are the thing that got us from 0 to 1 isn't going to get us from 1 to 10 to 100, whatever. So like it's constant reinvention, but there are some things that are much more like scientific, like game design, which is like and our economists, which do collaborate across the products, because like you said, like Top Shot has done so much more testing on that. Like so by the time it got to us, like we had a better idea as to like what sort of economy needed to be built, and like more frankly, like, or more specifically, like what we could avoid building based on what Top Shot experienced.
Yeah, no, I mean that's fascinating. That's really, I mean, it's really good to hear too, because you don't, I guess you wouldn't want your economist living in like a UFC strike bubble because
Yeah,
yeah,
and we also don't want to feel like it's just like things jumping from one thing to the other thing, and like I said, like things need to exist somewhat in like vacuums, but at the same time, like we don't need to make the same mistakes that other products did if they've already made them.
yeah,
And like we're testing things right now that maybe NFL All Day could learn from before
hmm,
they get a chance to test them because they have different short-term priorities than we have. So
hmm,
like it it's really it's a little bit of a nice dance, you know. You figure some things out, you bring it back and you share it, and we're constantly learning and or constantly working with more data than we ever did before,
that's
whether
very cool.
anecdotal or not, but
Mhm.
mostly anecdotal from across teams where it's just like this seems to click. I talk to collectors and they understand this, they don't understand that. Those nuances like become invaluable over time, especially when you're trying to market these things and like really understand that deeper. It's a good thing. Like I said, it feels like a bit of an incubator where there's like a constantly testing, constantly learning new things, but not attempting to like do the same things over and over again or learn the same mistakes twice.
Hmm.
So yeah, same brain, three different bodies, I guess. Maybe that's one way to think of it.
Nice, nice. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions I had today. Thank you so much for taking quite a big chunk of your time out of your day
Oh,
to
all
hang
good,
out
all
and
good.
talk about UFC Strike. I know, like I said, it's something that I have become extremely like excited about and passionate about, partly because some of the stuff we talked about, where I feel like it just has its very unique niche in the sport compared to other sports and their already existing collectibles and stuff. I think UFC Strike is like just super exciting, and I think you're seeing collectors and fighters both kind of agreeing with that, which is pretty cool to see as well. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out, and I really
Anytime.
appreciate it.
Anytime. Yeah, look forward to doing it again. I'm very like I'll just end that we're very encouraged by like what you just said, that collectors seem to be having fun again and seem to be excited about the future. Same with fighters. And that's really encouraging as we move forward here because I feel like we have a great foundation to go
Hell
from
yeah.
here. And yeah, so I'm excited. I appreciate the support as always. And it's great to finally get a chance to talk
Yeah.
about these kinds of things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anytime.
Face to face hits a little, or closer to face than
Cool.
Twitter
Yeah,
DMs. It's
that's
different.
right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but
I see you on Sports Center, and I'm like, I know him, and my fiance is like, really? And I'm like,
it's a long
Twitter
story.
DMs. It's a very long story.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much to everyone who has watched this video. I hope you took away some unique and interesting perspectives about UFC Strike, and hopefully learned a couple things. If you have a question or there's something that you feel like didn't get touched on, please feel free to leave a comment below. Like Nate said, hopefully this is the first of many, and would love to get questions from other collectors about how they see different rollouts, what they see big picture, and what they enjoy about UFC Strike. So make sure to leave a like, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and until next time, we'll see you guys next video. Please clap.